You are listening to the Brain Profits Podcast. We bring awareness to the reality that, in large, people allow their brains to control them, which is causing difficulty at school, at work, and in life.
Success in life and business starts in the brain. Therefore, we want to explore the challenges that exist for people and organizations so that they are in control of their brains and not the other way around.
Listen in, be inspired, and take back control of your brain, and you'll create optimal results in your life, organization, and community.
Ready to start the show? We are, so let's go.
Incrementalism is a bad word for a lot of people, but for me, constant progress is a form of evolution. Or maybe evolution is a form of constant progress. I don't know.
Jamie, you've hit on quite a few points throughout all of this that truly takes a conscious effort to be in that growth space, healing space, you might even say, because going back to just a few minutes ago when you were talking about we hold on to, it's like we clench in our fist, this must be right. And that makes sense to me because our brains, they're designed to keep us safe, comfortable. We look for the familiar, and what is known to us, just we want to grasp onto that. It takes a whole different layer of vulnerability to open that fist, and be willing to see that there might be multiple ways and just examine it and get curious. And I hear that in the way that you were talking about. It was priest you were hanging on to. Is it priest or not priest? Is it priest or not priest?
Yeah. And
then you created the presence of time to open your hand, and there was no priest hanging out there in the first place. You lost that one. It was never there. Exactly. And you were able to be in that moment. And again, it makes sense to me that we jump in to defend for that control and that safety. And to be aware of it is the first step to also be able to then take the vulnerability of, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try looking at it from a different angle, knowing full well that when I take the armor off, the person across the table from me or the boardroom from me might very well not be open to opening their hand, and they might attack me. That's a true reality. Just because we're open and growing doesn't mean others will.
Well, ultimately, we have to decide what kind of person we want to be.
Yes.
At the end of the day, we have to live with our own integrity, and at the end of the day, we only have to sleep with ourselves, and so being a mature human being is about making choices and being willing to live with the consequences. I think being conscious. Well, let me stop. Well, being conscious is really fundamental to it all. It is being intentional about being conscious of what you think and why you think it. And you just mentioned something that's really near and dear to me when you said we want to control things. Well, it's interesting that when I wrote my doctoral dissertation, I found out that people don't necessarily want to be in control. They just want somebody to be in control. And one of the problems we have in the United States right now is a lot of people feel like we're out of control. And so if you feel like nobody's in control, then you feel the need to reach in and control it yourself. And then if everybody's trying to control it, then we're not really working together, and we have to work together. But I think our politicians are taking huge advantage of the fear that is present in our society right now. And it's the easiest thing in the world to play on fear. And that's what we're doing right now, I think, in far too many cases.
Jerry, this is leading me into the last conversation you and I had when I came to your office. And for our listeners, I'm going to out myself to say that this conversation was so brilliant, but disappointed me so much. And I'll tell you about the disappointment in just a second, that I got stuck in my emotions and the discomfort of it. And I never came back to Jerry. So this is actually, Jerry could very much so be saying, I'm not talking to you. You didn't come back to me like you said you would. Your integrity sucks.
No.
And this is what happens when we allow our emotions to make choices for us rather than cognitively having control of our brain and our emotions and choosing accordingly. We have low integrity. But all that to say, the part of the conversation that disappointed me was when I said to you, Jerry, collective impact. Where are we doing it well? Where can we learn so that we can become force multipliers? And your answer was, we're not. We're terrible.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear from your perspective, Jerry, in all of these avenues you've worked in. How are we terrible at healing as a community and working together as a community? How do we get in our own way?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, I don't know that I would change my answer to you because let's define terms. I think we're okay at collaborating within sectors. So people who work on child care or child welfare, they're pretty good at working together, or they can be. People who are working in literacy within their own sector, they can collaborate well. But collective impact is about bringing the perspectives of people who are in business, people who are in the faith community, people who are in education, all of those sectors together. And we just haven't learned to, we don't have a common language that allows us to talk about issues together. Business people view the world differently from educators. Educators deal with the world differently from doctors. Doctors deal with the world differently from name your sector. And we don't have a lot of experience in everyone pulling together. And I'm optimistic because I'm such a Pollyanna when it comes to human nature. I believe in human nature. I believe that evolution leads us toward higher and higher planes of thought. But evolution moves very, very slowly.
It's incremental. Didn't you say that?
It is very incremental. I heard a really smart guy say that recently.
Just a couple minutes ago, in fact.
Maybe not so smart. In fact, there's a great book I would recommend that everyone read. It's called Thank God for Evolution. And so it really takes you back to how the brain actually works and how you can interpret some of the mythology that we use in faith circles for how the evolution of the brain actually happened. And so I highly recommend the book. I just think we have to keep at it. And in my dissertation, I learned that and by the way, don't go back and read my dissertation. It's humiliating.
I'm going to look it up right after this. I wish I would have done it before the call.
It's humiliating, I can tell you. But I learned that I studied what happens when organizations shrink. Most of the fundamental work on organizational development happened after World War II when the economy was booming and lots of organizations were growing, and people didn't set out to study growing organizations. They just studied organizations, and most of the organizations were growing. Well, then there came a period in our history where organizations began to shrink, and in one particular instance was when Toyota started building gas efficient cars, and all of a sudden everything related to the combustion engine in Michigan and Ohio went to hell in the handbasket, and so their tax base shrunk, and all these organizations in Ohio and Michigan were shrinking. And so I just happened to be at Ohio State at that time, and there had only been one other dissertation in America written on what happens when organizations shrink, and so I jumped on that opportunity to study it. And it turns out that the dominant organizational value of most organizations is growth. and they'll grow if they can. They'll do everything they can do to grow, regardless of what the consequences are in that, but they try to be bigger in year 2 than they are in year 1. When growth is no longer possible, then maintaining the status quo is the core organizational value, and they will do everything, no matter how destructive it is to the organization, to maintain the status quo. And what they typically do, it manifests itself through like across the board cuts. And so you say 3% across the board, 2% more across the board, 5% more across the board. And basically you really penalize the parts of the organization that are efficient. And then you, and you basically bring everybody into mediocrity. And then, it's only when maintaining the status quo is no longer possible that people start to be creative. And unfortunately, too often, it's too late. And so what we have to do is constantly try to get people to be creative, to work together. For example, organizations that are shrinking tend to centralize decision-making. At the one time they need the most creativity, they need the most good ideas in the history of their organization, fewer and fewer people are making decisions. They do exactly the opposite of what they need to do in order to maximize good outcomes. But it's all because they're scared. It's all because they're afraid that, afraid of everything, afraid they're going to fail, afraid people aren't going to like them, afraid that people are going to look at them as failures, afraid that they're not going to have a job, afraid that they're not going to be able to provide college education for their kids. I mean, fear. And fear drives so much of the negative behavior we see in virtually every aspect of our culture. And most of the time, the fear is irrational. I mean, really, will they really fire you for making one bad decision? Probably not. Now, everybody's got a batting average, but I mean, we just constantly fear. And one of the biggest things we fear is what other people are going to think about us. And so the opposite of love is fear. The opposite of love is not hate. Fear leads to hate in far too many instances. But what we've got to do is we've got to somehow find a way to put love at the center of all that we do. The most powerful force in the universe is love. Now, you know, we're called in my tradition, we're called to love our enemies. We're called to love everybody. Well, we're called to love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, what happened? There's a whole bunch of people in the world I don't even like. So how am I supposed to love them? You know, I'm a guy in a collar. I'm supposed to love everybody. Well, so I had to come up with a definition of love that I could live with. And I decided that to love someone is to want the best for them. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we could all approach life and wanting the best for everyone we encounter. So how does that manifest itself? For some people, it means giving a young person an opportunity, even if they haven't been proven, give them an opportunity. I got lots of those opportunities. I was 31 years old when I was named Dean of Students. It's ridiculous. I didn't know anything, but somebody took a chance on me. It might also manifest itself as when a homeless person comes up and asks for money, to say, no, I can't give you any money, but I want you to know I'll walk with you over to the Volunteer Ministry Center, and they will help you. And if they say, well, they won't help me, I say, well, if you do what you need to do, they'll do what they need to do. I promise you, they will help you, because I know that if I give them money, I'm just going to perpetuate their situation out on the street. If I encourage them to go where people are trained to help them not be homeless anymore, to address the issues like addiction and mental illness, the things that cause them to be homeless, then I'm much more likely to help them. And so to love them is to want the best for them. And I think maybe that's the attitude we all need to try to get people to adopt.
And I think it also means that, Stacy, next time you have a random Doug sighting, you just let them take some fruit.
Yes.
Well,
Thank you for educating.
It may not be the best time. You're absolutely right.
Well, you did that on purpose, because you know that I would probably be able to take Jerry down this. He and I could keep going. on this. And
Yeah, for sure.
it was occurring to me, we could keep having multiple conversations around this, and I hope that we do. But I appreciate you distilling it down to a basic start, and whether that be organization to organization, silo to silo, person to person, rather than what do I need to do to compete with you or to be right. But in fact, how can what you're up to be great, and we are actually greater together, is a beautiful curiosity that we could begin stepping into.
And that curiosity is the key. That may be the most important word that's been said. To be curious about what drives the other person, to be curious about what they love. And you know what? A whole bunch of the people who I disagree with politically have grandchildren. We pull out our iPhones and start showing grandchildren pictures. All of a sudden, whether you voted Republican or Democrat, just doesn't matter near as much as the fact that one thing we have in common is we all want a better future for our grandchildren. So how do we do it?
That's beautiful.
That's the barrier we have to cross.
And Jerry, that takes it back to going back to the simple basics of what we are taught, and then we seem to forget, and nobody comes back to reteach us this or invite us into it as adults. But what you're saying goes back to a lesson that I taught in the Boys and Girls Clubs with maybe 3rd and 4th graders around differences and similarities. And when we see differences, we can focus on the differences of each other, or we can get curious about where we align and celebrate differences and all of this. And we might be absolutely amazed at what comes out of it.
Well, and remember when we were talking a moment ago about when approaching a senator or a congressman and trying to be an advocate for a position, to start out with, I may be wrong. That's a part of appreciating differences, and again, it's about ethical, moral, and intellectual humility. And that's, it's hard to teach, but it can be taught. And if you start that way, now, honestly, if you're trying to get a point across to somebody who doesn't have those things, then it becomes a very frustrating thing. But I do, over time, I remember a conversation I had with the person who disagreed with my church's position on LGBT issues, and we consecrated a gay bishop. And he got up in my face one day on the sidewalk in downtown Knoxville, and he said, "You people are ruining my church." And he was angry, and he got up nose to nose. And he had a clenched fist, and I just said to him, "I understand how you feel, but I want to ask you, who was there when your daddy died?" It was us. Who was there when your son had a heart attack? It was us. And you can do whatever you need to do. If you need to hit me in the face, if you need to punch me in the gut, if you need to stand here and scream and holler at me, you can do that if you need to, but you can never make me stop loving you, because I'm always going to love you, whether you ever agree with me or not. And that's the way this church feels about you. And so do what you have to do. And he literally backed up. The force of that love pushed him backwards. And he said, "You really mean that, don't you?" I said, "I really do. There's nothing you can do to make me stop loving you." And he just shook his head and turned around and walked away. And it just took all the anger out.
Now that's a force multiplier.
Yeah, it's a force multiplier. Exactly. Exactly.
No, the cool thing, I always heard that in order to take the actions of love that you were talking about, wishing on somebody's best or wanting the best for somebody else, that's going to take courage. And rather than the opposite of courage being fear or being scared, the opposite of courage was conforming. So to not conform is the courageous thing to do. To want, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah,
I think what we say, I think being willing to live within community norms is a fine thing. I mean, we have community norms, and community, a real community, a real set of community norms benefits everybody. It's the key is when community norms are disproportionately benefiting one group over another, then having the courage not to conform is important. Lawrence Kohlberg is one of my heroes. He came up with this theory, and it's not a perfect theory, and I'll talk with anybody who wants to talk about Lawrence Spo. But he said we all, when confronted with moral dilemmas, stage one people, what is the right thing to do is what avoids punishment. Stage two is what the right thing to do is what gets me what I want. Stage three is what is the right thing to do is what gets the approval of my dominant referent group, whether that's peers or parents or scoutmasters or whoever it is. Stage four is the law is the law is the law. So what is the right thing to do when faced with a moral decision is what the law prescribes, even though it may not be good for you because laws are not perfect, but it's better for most of the people. Stage five is the stage of social contract, when we find that a law is not fair to everybody. We have an obligation, a moral obligation to try to change the law. And then stage six is more of a hypothetical stage, is where the stage of universal principle, where we reach a set of principles that all of us can agree on. But that, if you notice, that is moved, that theory of moral development moves from a single point, I, out to first to even being concerned with what others think, to being willing to sacrifice what might be good for myself in order to make sure there's not chaos in the world, to the social contract that I have with everybody to make sure that the world is fair. And I think ultimately that's essential to living a meaningful life, to get to the point where you identify with something larger than yourself. And we can do that through art, we can do it through science, we can do it through service, we can do it in a lot of ways.
You can do it through medical administration, education, being a dean, being a nonprofit CEO. Take it full circle.
I think you can.
Life, when you chose to be intentional here in Knoxville, has created great impact for us, and I appreciate you for that.
Thank you. That's very kind for you to say. I don't know if I've had any impact at all, but I've given it a good fight.
Man,
I love it.
That's funny.
Well, Doug, I suppose it's time for us to round out a bit. Do you have a closing question or comment for Jerry?
I was gonna let you have it.
Well, I did come prepared to answer the last question.
Okay, you go answer the last question. Well, first off, we gotta ask the last question. Hold on, let me go grab it.
Well, you mentioned what books I'm reading, and when we were talking before, and I'm going to commend the work of a man named David White, David B as in Victor White. David has written a whole host of essays. He's published a couple of books. I'm editing another of his books right now. The first book is called On Being Human, an Operator's Guide. And the second book is called Art, Science, Religion, and Spirituality, Seeking Wisdom and Harmony for a Fulfilling Life. David founded the Meaningful Life Center here in Knoxville, and his whole goal in life is to help people live meaningful lives. So go to meaningfullife.org, or if you'd like to read a lot more of David's work, go to meaningfullife.org.
I'm just impressed that there's now a guide on how to be a human being.
Yeah, well,
you know what's so funny?
Who knew?
So the question I wanted to have in that spot, and and our producer was like, no, it's a stupid question, was if you got to write a chapter for the manual that should come with your brain, what would the name of that chapter be? What would that be? Now you're just telling me, say this guy writing basically the manual for your life. But
I can tell you, I think the answer I would give to that question comes from Hinduism. Thou art that. That would be the name of the chapter. Thou art that. You are not separate. I think there's great wisdom in all of the world's religious traditions. The reason I'm a Christian is because in my life, Jesus has been the best manifestation of that truth and wisdom. But my Christianity is deeply informed by Buddhism, and Buddhism, of course, is deeply influenced by Hinduism. Suffering is caused, the Dalai Lama said, suffering is caused by disproportionate craving, attachment to things, disproportionate anger, which leads to hate, and ignorance. And the ignorance is not just lack of knowledge, but ignorance is the belief that we are individuals when we are not individuals. We all are linked. In fact, we are all one. And that's where the Hindu statement comes in. Thou art that. When I see you, I am you and you are me. We are not separate. So the most hedonistic thing I can do is to be kind to you because I'm really being kind to me. The dumbest thing I can do in the world is to be evil to you because I'm only hurting myself. We are fully bound in this world. And we've forgotten that in far too many contexts.
Wow. Well, Jerry, man, I have to thank you for this conversation. This was great. Is there anything, are you on social media? Are you on here for people to find you in these streets to be like, hey, Jerry, you were wrong, from their behind their thumbs?
I've never had a shortage of people telling me I was wrong. So I don't need to be on social media for that. But no, I'm not on social media. I've made a choice in the various jobs that I've had that I really need to be, I need to not do that. Maybe when I finally retire, I'll do that. But right now, but people can always reach out to me at J. Askew at St. John's Cathedral. That's STJOHNSCATHEDRAL.org.
All right.
Can I just say, I have taken away so much from this podcast with you that will certainly influence my evolution. Oh. And I've gotten at least 3 books that I'm looking forward to reading. So thank you.
Good. Well, as doing what you do in your scientific work, I really think that Thank God for Evolution book will be
that's number 1. I'm about to order that on Amazon right now.
Good. You can get all those books on Amazon, by the way.
Awesome. Thank you.
Another reason for you to come to East Tennessee and visit Doug and I in Knoxville, you might just be able to meet David White in person.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I think, this podcast is starting to change my view about Tennessee a little bit. Right? Out of all the shows we've shot, this is the one that I'm like, maybe I should head down there.
So the scientists didn't do it. The scientists didn't do it, but the DP did.
There's just a lot that has to balance out what you and I are bringing to the table, Doug. And thankfully, Jerry is a heavy lifter, so he definitely outweighed it to say, okay, I'll come.
Well, I think it's because he has.
Hey, Doc, if you come, I'll buy the drinks.
Sounds good. I'll be there.
It's really funny, Stacey. What it really is because if you look behind Jerry, he's got all those books, right? And we only have a handful. Well, I don't have no books behind me. You have a few, but he has all those much so that Philippe's feeling like that guy really reads down there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you knew this is just a background, right?
It's his Zoom background. Yeah.
No,
anyways.
Books mean you're smart, right? You have to have that kind of background.
That's what it means.
Yeah.
Well, hey, so for people who want to find Jerry, you heard his email, will be in the show notes. And hey, Jerry, thanks for coming on, man. And
it's my pleasure.
You guys know where to find us. Share the show with your friends. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And you know how it goes. Until next time, we're the Brain Prophets.
All right.
Take care, guys.
All right,
Thank
guys.
you.